Hi, I'm Parsa Mufti, and I welcome you to NewsPlatform's discussion on India's agrarian crisis. The agrarian sector employs between 50 and 56% of India's workforce, which could have swelled dramatically after the migrant exodus that we saw when the pandemic hit. Despite this, agriculture's contribution to the GDP has declined 12% in 2016 to 6.5% in 2019. There are multiple problems with regard to the Fasal Bima Yojana, and the farmers are not getting adequate remuneration for their crops. However, the NDA government has said that the Fasal Bima Yojana has become a safety net for all farmers. How deep exactly is the agrarian crisis in India? And has the NDA government done enough? I'm privileged to host Professor Abhijit Sen, former member Planning Commission and professor at JNU, Ajay V. Jakharji, chairperson Punjab Agriculture Commission, and Kavita Kuruganti ji from the Alliance for Sustainable and Holistic Agriculture. My first question is to Professor Sen. Sir, India's agricultural growth dropped from an average of 3.37% from 2004 to 14 to an average of 2.7% from 2014 to 19. And similarly, agriculture and allied sectors' contribution to GDP growth decreased from 12.25% to 6.55%. Is India undergoing an agrarian crisis?
Yeah, the short answer to your final question, is there a crisis? There probably is a crisis. There almost certainly is a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of difficulties facing farmers. Does the growth rate or the share of agriculture have much to do with it? I'm not so sure. I think we play up growth rates too much. And there certainly has been a fall in the rate of growth of agricultural production, particularly crop production. The current rate of growth is not too far from the old average rate of growth of around 2.8, 2.9%. During the UPA years, it's gone up to almost 4%. But as I said, growth rates of agricultural output is not what crises are all about. Crises are all about mainly farmers' incomes, which are other things at play along with the total volume of agricultural output, which is what the growth rates are measuring. Similarly, the share of agriculture in total GDP is not that meaningful a concept. You'd expect it to go down because as an economy grows, agriculture share normally comes down. It has been doing so for a very, very long time. But again, it all depends upon how this is all distributed. The fact is that till the NDA years, or rather till the demonetization, you had a situation where while agriculture share was falling, the rural share in GDP wasn't going down that much, simply because rural areas were having all sorts of non-agricultural activity coming in. You also had on top of that remittances coming in from people who migrated for short-term work. So the rural economy looked much better than the agricultural GDP shares that you look at. Unfortunately, that's another area in which we have over the last 3 or 4 years, and in particular in this year, seen a massive setback, which is that remittances have gone down, migrants have come back. That is, instead of being people who are sending money outside, they're now more dependent on whatever is being produced by their relatives. And finally, you have a situation where I think one of the questions finally will come to, what is it that farmers really need. I think there are 3 or 4 very important things which I'm sure Ajay and Kavita will be able to develop on. Number 1 is the way prices and markets work. That's been one of the main reasons why agriculture, or rather farmers, have done badly in the past few years. The second is, are we actually looking at the environment, the climate, and if so, what is the technology solutions to that we have? The third is, there is something which began in the UPA years. The NDA has supposedly magnified it massively, which is that rather than concentrating on growth of output, simply give things to do to increase incomes of farmers. So they've come up with PM Kisan, for example. They're putting money into insurance. But PM Kisan is an example where we just give money, and it's not very clear that that is not overloading a system which was supposed to do all sorts of other things as well. So there are issues there. There will be different points of view, but the broad answer is that on growth, it's agriculture growth. Things have not worked out as well as during the UPA years, but let's not play that up too much. On decline in agricultural share in GDP, let's not play that up too much. Really what matters is how much do agricultural families get from prices, remittances, and everything else, and how well is the rural economy doing? And finally, are we dealing with the long-run problems of climate change, environment, and our proper attitude towards technology? Okay, I think it's on those 3 fronts that the crisis actually exists.
Right, sir. While we're discussing the woes of the farmers, Kavita ji, farmer incomes grew at 5.52% per annum between 2004 and 12. And in stark contrast, the incomes of all farmers declined at 1.36% per annum between 2012 and 16. Has the NDA been able to live up to its promise of doubling farmer incomes? And what is the impact of these declining farmer incomes on the rural economy?
Well, it's very clear that they have not lived up to their promise, and the promise itself is not something that would have changed much for farmers, because the baseline incomes were quite low, and to say that you will double it would not have really taken farmers to a level where they would have had dignified lives. But on the commitment, they have certainly failed, and they are failing. And to this day, despite a large voluminous report on how to double farmers' incomes, there is clearly no roadmap with clear milestones and so on. All those volumes put together make for a very good reading, make for a very good analysis for what's going wrong in Indian agriculture at this point of time. But they've not collectively spelled out what exactly is the shortest and strongest pathway that will be adopted to double farmers' incomes. And on your question about would that have helped rural economy, there's enough and more evidence that shows that strengthening and enhancing farm incomes would not help just farmers, it would help a nation's economy in itself, and it's not just the rural economy. This has been shown in other countries also, that when you focus on agricultural incomes and actually manage to enhance them, then the purchasing power, especially in a country like India, where a majority of people live off agriculture and they are still in rural India, if you can ensure that they have enough purchasing power, then it has positive implications for other sectors of the economy, obviously. And it also has a bearing on what farmers will be able to pay agricultural workers, if that is the lowest stratum that we have to begin with. Without producer incomes improving, their ability to pay their workers will obviously be affected. And then you do have to think about propping it up with a variety of other schemes. There would be a greater dependence on schemes like NREGS, for instance, or newer and newer schemes having to be announced in, as we've seen in the COVID pandemic. So having to focus on farm incomes is very, very essential. There's no doubt about it. But we need a clear roadmap on it. We need everything in the machinery to be geared towards that outcome. That has not happened. The different parts of the architecture, if you like, that are focusing on different aspects. And that kind of cohesion and that kind of a roadmap still has not been worked out. And the government has done foolhardy things itself. Demonetization, as mentioned by Professor Sen just now, which has set us back quite a bit. So we do want incomes to be focused upon. We do want income security for farmers, but we want political will that delivers it.
Right, ma'am. Income security is very important for farmers, and this takes me to the next question. Ajay ji, under the UPA2, the average annual MSP growth rate was 19.3%, and under the NDA, this has fallen drastically to 3.6%. Why has this happened?
First of all, I think that the UPA, when you look at the UPA period, you're talking about 10 years of UPA versus 5 or 6 years of BJP. And in the time when international commodity prices was high, the MSP rose very high in those particular years. It did not rise consistently over 10 years, as you're saying. Meaning that only when international prices were very high did Indian farmers get a higher price. When international prices came down, consequently, even MSP rises in UPA2 were not very high. But you will also see that because of higher MSP, it led to higher inflation in the country. Maybe RBI was releasing more money, maybe UPA was giving more crony capitalists high loans, which was fueling an artificial economy of boom. And that led to inflation, and inflation actually created an atmosphere where anti-corruption movements and other movements against UPA could rise, and they had a platform to work upon. So considering all those facts, I think when the BJP has come to power, it has consistently been BJP's priority to ensure that food inflation and inflation is in check. That is the primary objective of the BJP. I think BJP is much more focused than UPA on its policies. I think UPA was not very focused on its policies. It had lots of pulls and pressures from the National Advisory Council, from the Planning Commission, from government ministers. I think things have started to go haywire. But BJP is focused on controlling inflation, and the best way to control inflation, easiest way for the government to control inflation, is not to allow farm gate prices to rise or for them to show, to reflect the real cost of growing food. So obviously MSP is one of those means to do it. I also see that minimum support price is getting a new meaning nowadays, which is that it is the maximum selling price for farmers. So, for example, if you look at the minimum support price of chana and arhar dal, they're both selling below minimum support price, but the government was still importing masood. They reduced the import duty on masood from 30% to 10%. So I don't think so the government is interested or targeting that farmers get a higher price than MSP, but so it's somehow become the ceiling price rather than the bottom ceiling price has become that. And you will also see that the support price after the last elections has drastically fallen. The minimum support prices have drastically fallen because I think politically it's not required anymore. The government may be thinking like that. The minimum support price for paddy, which is the largest procurement item for the government under the minimum support price program, it was increased by 3%. While the CACP report on which it was based itself talks about an anticipated 5.1% increase in cost of cultivation. Also, when you look at inflation in cereals stood at 8.4%, but still MSP rose by 3%, which actually means that the price increase does not even is actually in real terms maybe less than what it was last time. So I just want to end by saying why this is happening is because the government priorities are completely different on controlling inflation, and the government is financially strained because of various policy reasons of the last many years. So the government does not even have money for economic stimulus, which may push up inflation. In spite of that, government is focused on controlling inflation. The RBI has very clearly, the governor of RBI has very clearly said that inflation must be kept, food inflation must be kept in control. I think the RBI is unable to control its own house, and it finds it easiest to give advice sitting in Bombay about controlling farmer livelihoods instead. Thank you.
Right, sir. Ma'am, coming back to you, the Fasal Bima Yojana has enabled private insurance companies to reap windfall profits at the expense of farmers. And the number of farmers enrolled under the scheme is also dropping. Is the Fasal Bima Yojana problematic, and what needs to be done to rectify this?
Well, the fact that PMFBI has been designed badly, just like earlier insurance schemes also had several deficiencies, it's clear from the fact that more and more state governments, including BJP-ruled state governments, are walking out of PMFBI and are setting up their own state level schemes by setting up separate new institutions if required, but certainly new schemes. And the problems are multifold, and these have plagued Indian crop insurance schemes right from the very beginning, because several things are tied in. Crop insurance is not just about crop insurance, it's tied in with crop credit for the longest time. It's only in the recent past it's been said that insurance is not mandatory and it's voluntary on farmers. But farmers have not been told that they have to explicitly ask banks if they want to opt out. They're only discovering it only now. So in terms of what are the issues here? One, crop insurance, including PMFBY, has not been attractive enough to farmers because they don't really feel compensated for the losses that they have incurred. This has got something to do with the formulae that get applied in fixing the compensation amounts and so on. The second bit is really procedural and implementation related, which is that there are enormous delays. And farmers are not in a position to bear these delays. You know, you've got to just quickly get back onto your feet and start preparing for the next crop to try and recover losses. That's the kind of pressure, economic pressure on farmers. And if your schemes don't deliver on the kind of rapidity that's required to help them recover, then farmers will be disillusioned with the schemes. So there have been delays. There have been issues with how yields are getting assessed, whether technology is being applied enough, latest technological tools. You know, there are allegations of crop cutting experiments as well being rigged. Sometimes by the government departments. In some states, these stories are also being, told, but also by the insurance companies. And there are no grievance redressal mechanism for farmers. Not all risks are adequately covered. So the list is long about why things are not actually improving and we are in the age of climate change. It's not futuristic. It's upon us already. So what we need is at least some immediate improvements, even if crop insurance doesn't work for us. In India, we should at least think about the disaster compensation mechanisms, which are more universal, which are not just meant for subscribers of a scheme to benefit from. We need at least that to improve drastically so that you can cover all farmers. You have a quick way of dealing with it without too many players coming into the picture. But what we need to ensure is that, at the farm production level itself, how do we reduce risks to farmers by the technologies that we deploy, by bringing in a little more resilience into the crop production system, by spreading out livelihood sources through integrated farming systems and so on. And then other institutional scheme-based mechanisms, which can also certainly improve. But FBY has been a failure. There's no doubt about it. The insurance companies may be putting out their figures saying that we really did not make windfall profits. That's all, bogus analysis and all of that. The government may be speaking on behalf of the insurance companies, but the fact remains that farmers also have not benefited on the ground. It's as simple as that.
Right, ma'am. Professor Sen, coming back to you, news came out recently that agricultural exports have increased. And but there have been many examples of farmers protesting because onion prices are dropping. In Karnataka and Maharashtra, milk was dumped on the streets. And in UP, sugarcane arrears have not been paid. All of this is happening despite the fact that APMCs were also scrapped. And why is there this dichotomy? How are the farmers suffering when agricultural exports are increasing?
First of all, agricultural exports, however important they may be, are relatively minor as part of the total volume or income from agriculture. Agricultural exports, by and large, depend upon a number of things. But one of the most important things that agricultural exports depend upon is domestic demand. If domestic demand is low, there are surpluses, exports tend to rise. So exports would actually be a reflection of the fact that the overall demand is not growing or even contracting. The second thing on which agricultural exports depend is the relative price that consumers in other countries are getting compared from India compared to wherever else they might source. And as Ajay just put it, Indian farmers normally have had a higher price than the world price in many cases, not always, in the last 10 years or so. Before that, it was much less. But now, it's quite likely that in a large number of areas, you do have lower Indian prices, making Indian goods attractive. Now, that's what's not good for farmers. That is, low prices driving export, and second, no domestic demand creating the surplus for export. Neither of those two are great things. But yes, the only area in which exports are rising is agriculture. And that's why it's been played up. Because our export performance overall has been very, very miserable. The more important question, I think, when it comes to agricultural trade, is do we have policy at all on agricultural exports and imports? Now, in the past, and it was true during the UPA, you got knee-jerk reactions. You did things simply because you looked at domestic pressures. You banned exports sometimes, you banned the import sometimes. And the system has been calling out for a clear agricultural trade policy which is linked to whatever price support policy or price policy that you might have. And this, I remember when I was in CACT, we were pushing for it, and that's over 20 years ago. Nothing's happened in those 20 years. And we as a country, I think, have failed farmers massively because we simply do not have that simple concern that if we're going to be in the trade business, either you've got to be open, let it all to the market. We know that that leads to leisure. But if you don't want leisure, you need a consistent foreign policy. So on that, I would again come back to this. The issue of prices on the one hand, a policy on technology, environment, how do we see the output growth in the future? And what is it all for? I think Kavita actually made a very important point, which is that when it comes to agriculture, it's not just the farmers' income. It's the income of farmers, it's the income of farmers, people farmers employ, and it's income of people from whom farmers buy. That is the entire market that the farmers actually address, and that creates jobs. So there's a bigger game there. There's a bigger general equilibrium there. There used to be some planning. I don't see any of that. But as I said, on the export input front, it's a collective blunder, failure over years and years.
Right, sir. My last question is for Ajay, sir. 12.5 crore farmers were to benefit from the PM Kisan. And however, till July 15, 2019, only 3.97 crore or 32% of the eligible beneficiaries received the first installment. And this has increased since then, but how useful is the PM Kisan, and especially during the pandemic?
So I would want to say two things. To quote a figure of last year would not be proper. I think it's over 6-7 crore people now that who are benefiting from PM Kisan. But I think the government has also reconciled to the fact that the maximum number of people they will be able to enroll in this program will not be more than 8 to 9 crore rupees. So it will not be 12 crore rupees. I think the government believes that that was a wrong estimate on their part. But having said that, we must, Abhijit Sen Saab will, I think so, agree on this, that probably the best program of the Agriculture Ministry is the PM Kisan program, where they actually have to do nothing but transfer the money, where government interference is the least. So I think so, it talks about issues of governance at the Ministry of Agriculture, that lesser they do, the better it is for farmers. But having said that, if you look at PM Kisan, first of all, how it is benefiting farmers. First of all, it's only available to the landed class. It's not available to people who do not own land, who really need the financial support. And also 6,000 rupees. If we try and see how much is 6,000 rupees, if you look at the Punjab Agriculture University report on the usage of diesel per acre of those farmers who grow paddy and wheat, as in Punjab, Haryana, UP, people do, where MSP is the prevalent mode of payment and satisfaction. So if you look at that, then farmers are using 80 liters of diesel. And if you look at the taxes that the government is imposing on this 80 liters of diesel, for a 5-acre farmer, it comes to 6,000 rupees. Even if you discount, so let me rephrase it. On an average, you could say farmers are using around 40 liters of diesel for cultivation across India. And the tax that the government is collecting in various forms from a farmer on using 40 liters of diesel is approximately 6,000 rupees per year. So whatever the government is collecting from the farmers, it is from the farming community, it is giving back to PM Kisan, to beneficiaries. So it's something that the farmers are funding themselves to the government. So this is something that must be understood. And there are also other taxes which the government is collecting from farmers. If you look at GST, when farmers buy pesticides, seeds, implements, tractors, they cannot go and claim credit for it. So they have to pay those expenses also. And this is what happens with cash transfer schemes. They are much appreciated by farmers. They're much appreciated by policymakers. But at the same time, it allows the government to dilute other programs, which farmers and beneficiaries don't understand, as they have done with this. I will give you I'll give you one more example. If you look at the gas cylinder subsidy, last year, the price of a gas cylinder available to a poor beneficiary who was a beneficiary under the Ujjwala scheme in my village was something like 503 rupees in last July, when the crude prices were $60. Today, the crude prices is around $40, but the beneficiary is paying 611 rupees. So even though the cost of crude prices, on which I would presume cylinder prices would be linked to it directly, has fallen by, I think so, 1/3. The price of the gas cylinder has increased by 20%. So in this system of being satisfied with the PM beneficiary direct payment to the cash, it allows space to the government to withdraw and dilute itself from other programs. And I want to come back to the issue of minimum support prices of inflation control. What I foresee happening is that OPEC and Russia have come to an agreement now on cutting back on excessive oil being sent to the markets, which will mean that over the next few months, we will see the price of crude oil rising to something like $60 from where it is today. It could reach $55 to $65. When that happens, I think so, there will be huge pressure on not only India, worldwide pressure of inflation. So our economy is very closely linked to crude prices. So I anticipate inflation rising because of these factors and other factors. And that also will compel the government to subdue farm gate prices. And I think so this is what we must also keep in mind. Thank you.
Right. I think it is clear from what our panelists have each argued that there is an agrarian crisis in India today. And it has only been exacerbated by the pandemic and climate change. So even though the PM Kisan scheme seems to be serving the purpose, the PMFUI has clearly failed, and it is imperative for the government to reassess its policies and come up with a comprehensive plan that actually addresses the need of the hour. Thank you for joining us today.